Hey everybody, it's Kruse back here. We are talking about elements of a plot diagram today, and we have a lot of stuff to go through. So for the sake of speed, I'm going to go kind of quickly, and as always, if you need to pause the video to have some more time to take notes, please do so. And I'm going to play some music for you too. Okay, so we're talking about plot diagrams. This is what a plot diagram looks like. You can draw them different ways, but this is how we're going to think about them. And so what I want you to do in your notes right now is just take a minute and copy down this plot diagram and go ahead and number it just like this. And if you know the names for the numbers, you can put those too. Okay, so plot is the sequence of events that make up a story, and it is also known as the storyline. Storyline is a synonym for plot. Okay, so the very first part, the one that you labeled number 1 in the red rectangle here, is known as the exposition. That's the grown-up term for the beginning of the story. And readers find out 3 things in the exposition. You'll be expected to be able to list these off the top of your head. They figure out who the main characters are, what the main setting is, and what the main conflict is. Okay, so the inciting incident. This is the exciting event, usually exciting, that starts the rising action. So it is part of the rising action, but it's its own little thing. Whatever event starts or kicks off the rising action is known as the inciting incident. Okay, the part on the plot diagram that you label number 2 is the rising action, this big red rectangle area. It is the events that lead to the climax, which is why in our plot diagram they're indicated by little mini mountains as part of the whole mountain. Each of those little mini mountains or steps is an event, and the rising action develops the conflict further, or conflicts if there's more than one, and it builds interest and suspense. Alright, so the third part is called the climax. This is the turning point of the story. Usually the main character confronts a conflict, which is what results in the turning point. Often the climax is also the most suspenseful part, but not always. So when you're identifying the climax, think about what the main problem is, and then think about what the turning point for that problem is. Alright, So then after the climax, part 4 is known as the falling action. These are the events that lead to the resolution, and the conflicts are beginning to be resolved. The falling action, the events are often just as interesting, if not more interesting, than the rising action. Usually there are fewer events than what you would find in the rising action. I want to dance with somebody too. Love me some Whitney Houston. Alright, wee! Down the slide. Last part of the plot diagram is the resolution. So it's not, well, it is the ending, but the big grown-up term is resolution. So the story comes to an ending and all of the conflicts are resolved. Woot woot! Yay for happy endings. However, they are not all happy endings. An ending or a story can end and a problem can be resolved in a way that is not satisfying to readers. If a story does not have a resolution, it is known as a cliffhanger, which you might have heard of in the past. But for the purpose of our phrase that pays, that you need to know for tomorrow, that's what it is, cliffhanger. Okay, so putting it all together, this is what it looks like. The exposition is the beginning of the story. Rising action, climax, falling action consists of the middle of the story, and the resolution is the end of the story. Okay, now this may be a new term. Subplots are smaller stories within a story. They are related to the main plot, but they are less important than the main plot, and they still contain a conflict. All plots have to have a conflict. So if you look at the graphic there at the bottom, the blue line is the main plot, the one that's labeled as story arc. All of the other black, red, yellow lines, those are all subplots. So they all have their own problems, and they're all going on approximately the same time as the main plot. You can see that a couple of them actually end early, which is fine. If a story has multiple problems, some of them are resolved before the main problem is resolved. Okay, so the subplot in the movie Finding Nemo, hopefully you've seen it. If not, we'll have another example here in a minute. The main plot is that Nemo is kidnapped. So Marlin, who is his dad, and Dory, the one who is a crazy fish who forgets everything, have to cross the dangerous ocean in order to save Nemo. The conflict is all of the hazards of the ocean that Marlin and Dory have to avoid. Now, simultaneously, but less important, is the subplot where Nemo has to adjust to his new surroundings in the dentist's aquarium, and he's trying to free himself. And the conflict there is Nemo is trying to escape the dentist's office before the dentist's crazy niece, Marla, shakes him to death or, does something that would end his life. So that's another example. That's an example of a subplot. Another example is in The Lion King. The main plot is obviously the conflict between Scar and Simba, but then you have a subplot going on during that whole thing, which is the friendship and blossoming romance of Simba and Nala. So in movies especially, there's almost always going to be a subplot. The longer the story is, or the movie is, the more likely that you'll have more than one subplot, and the more adult-like the story is, probably the more subplots you'll have also. Okay, setting. This refers to time, place, and weather. Sometimes people forget that the weather is part of the setting. The setting contributes to the mood of a story. We're going to talk about mood here in a second, but it's basically the way you feel while you're reading. And the setting changes with the plot. So in this picture here, you can see on the left-hand side, because the setting is nighttime, the mood is a lot spookier. But on the right side, where it's daytime, it's pretty much the same exact picture, but there are fewer shadows, it's not as eerie, it's more like, oh, happy forest. So the time, place, and weather affect the mood of a story. Okay, so speaking of mood, this is, as I said, the feeling a story creates in a reader. Readers can feel a whole bunch of different ways. A story's mood is impacted by the words an author uses. And tomorrow and for the next few days, we will be looking at some examples of mood and identifying words that you think would be good descriptors for it. Alright, so people often confuse mood and tone. They are similar, but they are not synonyms. Tone is the author's attitude or voice in the writing, which is usually conveyed through the characters, through what they say, how they act, etc. Now you're going to use similar types of words to describe the mood and tone, meaning adjectives, but the mood is not usually going to be the same as the tone. So an example would be conversation 1. Mom says, "What are your plans for today?" The son, "I'm going to the store." There's really no mood that stands out there. It's just like comfortable, conversational, informal, and tone is just like factual, right? They're just having a factual conversation. But in the second conversation, the mom says, "What are your plans for today?" Same question. But the son replies, "I'm going to the store," in a very angry tone. Now, the tone here is angry, but we as readers do not feel angry when we listen to it, so the mood is not angry. So we're going to be looking at identifying the difference between mood and tone, because obviously there is one, but it can be a little bit tricky. Nothing to be scared of. Okay, when we talk about theme, theme is a message or main idea in a story, and it can be one word or it can be a phrase. Generally, it's not an entire sentence, because usually if it's an entire sentence, it states a lesson, and then it would be known as a moral. So some examples are listed here, and I'll give you a minute to write down what you need to. Alright, and then point of view is referring to who's telling the story. The narrator, what point of view are they coming from? This is helpful for you to know, because then you can identify any bias that might exist. You would know if it's limited, that we're not getting all the information that we might need. If it's omniscient, you would know that we can see inside several different characters' minds, so we're getting a lot of information, which is beneficial to us as readers. But when we talk about first person point of view is a character in the story telling the story. So an example would be, "I decided to go save my son." If the narrator is using pronouns like I, me, and my outside of dialogue, then it's first person point of view. Third person point of view is a voice outside of the story tells the story. So an example would be, "He swam around the reef," or "they," or "she." When you're using the third person pronouns outside of dialogue again, then it's probably third person point of view. And there is also something known as second person point of view, but that is more, you see that more in business writing or technical writing or informal writing, where the narrator is actually speaking directly to the audience using pronouns like you, and that's not going to be a popular one, so we're not talking about that. One more thing, when you're writing about the plot of a story, always write in present tense. Just because you close the book or finish reading the story doesn't mean that it's not still going on if you were to open it back up. Fictional stories are always ongoing because they are not true. So what I'm talking about is when you are summarizing or writing anything about a fictional story, you want to use verbs that are present tense, such as, "Harry Potter loves attending Hogwarts," but you would not want to write, "Harry Potter loved attending Hogwarts." Of course, there are exceptions, like if somebody dies and you're summarizing that, of course, you would put that in past tense. But as a general rule, present tense is what you use to summarize fictional stories. And that, in a nutshell, is plot. So we'll see you tomorrow.